All
Yeah.
right. Let's do some basic stuff. So, one at a time. Can you introduce yourself, who you are, anybody you represent, and what you do, and any past experiences like your resume?
Yeah, I guess I can go first. My name is Tom. I started DWG. I make all the physics and a good handful of the models for DWG. Um, been drifting for 10 years in real life. Make steering knuckles and suspension parts and composite body panels and stuff for cars in real life too. Um, yeah, I guess that's most of it. I
Really?
don't know what
So,
else to really say.
what kind of knuckles do you make?
Pretty much whatever people want for the most part. Like, most of the knuckles are like a B knuckle style S13 knuckle, just like a cut and dropped tie rod pickup point on the knuckle for the most part. People don't want it dropped and they want it to shorten, they'll do that. Otherwise, kind of whatever chassis people want to do, like RX-7s, Cressidas, GS, stuff like that.
All right. So you're a little bit experienced. So drifting for 10 years. What's your home track?
Um, my home track, I guess, would be Brainerd International Raceway in Minnesota. Other than that, US Air and Interstate Raceway, or Top End as it used to be called. Those are the other two tracks that are close.
Oh, awesome. All right. Then what do you drift in real life?
I got a 98 GS 400. It's manual swapped with a Z32 trans. Otherwise, it's pretty simple setup. It's got like vacuum brakes instead of the electronic one, hydraulic handbrake, just kind of the normal stuff to make a drift car go.
Damn. Why
Super
a
reliable.
GS?
It's just, I don't know, it's super comfortable. It's got plenty of power. It's really reliable. Got heat, AC, nice stereo.
How old are you?
I'm 27.
27. You're already ready for comfortable stuff. I got you.
Wins.
Yep.
Yeah. All right. I appreciate that. All right. Next up.
I'm Shadow Hunter. Been making mods on Assetto on and off for 5 years now, basically. I do 3D modeling and data. I make my own cars, basically, 100% myself.
All right.
Um, Comes to real life experience. I got, been drag racing and autocross and all that good shit for a couple years.
What brings you to drifting on a Assetto then? If you're a drag racer.
Because I also like drifting. I like everything, man.
Well, so like, what did you start with? Like, if there's you just touched so many things, and I'm always interested because the drag guys I meet almost have like absolutely no interest in drifting. They just want to go straight and like it's hard by the numbers, and drifting
That's
is really
boring.
like how is it boring? How is drag
Because
racing boring?
after you go to a test and tune night and you run 30 runs in like a span of 20 minutes, you're bored.
Damn.
I
Okay.
mean, honestly, straight line is not that fun. I prefer road course and autocross and stuff like that. But I grew up around muscle cars and drag racing, so I started racing with drag racing.
All right. But what's do you what do you drift in real life?
I mean, I don't really drift. I just, street shenanigans. But I got a '98 Trans Am with about 450 wheel horsepower.
Oh, damn. And I mean, I guess if you just do kind of more street stuff, you don't really have a local track, do you?
No, I mean there is one, but I never actually ran it because I don't have a car I'm willing to throw into a wall yet.
I
I
understand.
like my car too much.
Any notable cars that anybody watching this would know from you, like on
Um,
Assetto?
I mean old shit that's terrible by today's standards, but like the original 501 pack from several years ago that came out back when there was only like DW and DTP and Tando Buddies.
Okay.
And then I don't know. It depends on what else they pay attention to. I've helped Tom with some cars, and I've recently just got back into actually like making my own that are actually like semi-reasonable up to modern standards.
All right, like what's the difference between back then and now?
I understand how to do 3D a whole lot better, and I understand I understand physics more than I did back then.
Okay, all right. I mean, I guess for the sake of the audience, if whoever's going to be watching this, I should probably introduce myself. So, I'm Yoshi. I actually have been running drift events in some form or fashion since about 2005. So a lot of real life experience. E30 dude, E46 dude. Um, Let me think. I moved to Japan about 7 months ago, and trying to figure out how to drift here. It's pretty difficult. And as far as my online stuff is concerned, I'm a software developer of about 17 years. So I've actually done a number of attempts at making my own drifting game, and I actually have a decent proof of concept. But as far as like physics and stuff is concerned, someone dubbed me the chemist. I really like physics and what makes things go, and not just enough to do something, but like why and how I can make my own. So like I've been currently piddling with my own car pack with a buddy of mine, and I mean they're feeling pretty good, and trying to like the line between real life and sim seems to be blurring a lot lately, where there's a lot of like FD pros that are starting to use Assetto, and it's really interesting, and the tire physics. I mean, just like in real life, I feel like tires make all the difference in a car. You can set up the suspension all you want, but if the tires are garbage, it doesn't really lend itself to feeling like real life.
I mean, the things people forget about Assetto is its nuance. There's a hell of a lot of nuance when it comes to physics.
Yeah, and then it's difficult to see what is the difference, because a lot of real life drivers, when they go to sim, have a really hard time kind of adjusting to it, and I think a lot of that is from the loss of like feedback.
Yeah,
you
it's a
can't
big difference.
you can't feel the G forces, and so like a buddy of mine, I don't know if you know Dan Savage, he was like a Pro One driver like a number of years ago. And we started getting him into it, and I mean, he's full bore into it now, and he's acclimating to it. But it was, in real life to see him slay, and then to watch him like wall it in Assetto is kind of an interesting juxtaposition. Our other buddy Austin Meeks got him into it and like helped him set up the whole stuff, so that was pretty cool. So anyway, before we go any farther, like I'm still learning when it comes to the tire physics. So if I say something wrong, please by all means call me out on it. I'm still kind of fumbling through this stuff, and I'm deferring to people who know more than me. So feel free to call me out on bullshit. So I wanted to talk about not only tire physics, but I'll bring up on my screen right now, which you guys can't see, but I have a car.ini file. And one of the things that I learned recently is the control section with the FFMult. So I guess the force feedback multiplier. And the steering assist, steering lock, steering ratio, and the steering rod ratio. Like, I've noticed that basically every single car pack I've seen locks the FFMult at 2, and the stock Kunos cars I think are like 1.4 to 1.6.
It's arbitrary.
Yeah,
Right.
it kind of depends. I've lately been running them around like 1.9, 2. Just gives it more of a firmer feel in the wheel. Like I feel like I'm actually getting the feedback that the car would be getting in real life. Some cars in Assetto are lower, some of them are higher, but they also have more leverage in the suspension geometry on the tie rod part of the knuckle versus what most drift cars have
It's,
in Assetto.
Right.
it's
So
basically all the same thing as like real life suspension geometry. The more scrub
Yeah,
radius and caster and all these stuff that would
exactly.
normally have a stiffer steering setup in real life, you can also. So if you have something that has what would a bunch of trail, a bunch of caster, a bunch of a bunch of limited leverage. You might have something that has really heavy steering in real life where you might put it in Assetto and you can set it to a FFB multiplier of like 1 and it still feel like you have quote unquote power steering and you can steer it with one finger, or you might need to crank that up if you want the feel. And it also depends on like the weight of the car and your grip of the tires. It's again nuance.
So I mean I feel like you mentioned trail and scrub radius for the people who don't know, like what are those, like in the quickest terms, and then how does that affect the FFMult of what we're talking about here?
So I got up on my my screen right here.
Yeah.
So you can see we're looking at the front suspension of the Chevelle here, and we got a few different things. So scrub radius is technically, you can see this line that connects between the upper control arm and the lower control arm. And the scrub radius will take, this gray line, you follow that all the way down to where it might intersect with the ground and compare it to the contact patch of the tire. Let me do this too, so you can see it a little bit better. So you follow this all the way down, and basically the difference between where this line intersects the ground and the center of your tire is your scrub radius. So the larger that is, you got to think of it kind of like a pivot here. So like the more scrub radius you have, say outwards. So if you have a really, what is that, positive scrub radius? Positive scrub radius is, I always get those two mixed up trying to actually physically describe them. But if your scrub radius is larger on the outside of the tire than it is on the inside of the tire, your tire is going to swing around the kingpin axis a lot more, versus where if it's tucked in a lot better, it doesn't have as much swing pivot to it. It's more on the inside of the tire. So you kind of want to keep that a smaller number as you can, but obviously like with drift cars and stuff like that, doing extended control arms, depending on your geometry, they usually have a little bit more scrub radius on them.
Yeah, so like in real life, if you shove like a 2-inch spacer on it, it's really going to mess up your scrub radius, right?
Yeah, that adds basically 2 inches to your scrub radius, 100%.
So how does that affect steering feel?
It's quite a bit, like, because like you got to think also too about like pivoting and stuff like that, but it's more of like a leverage thing. It gets a lot heavier when you have a higher scrub radius. It takes a lot more force to turn the wheel because it's quote unquote scrubbing more.
Right. So I'm assuming the FF multiplier, the force feedback multiplier, a 1 would be 1-to-1. And I noticed that a lot of the packs that we're dealing with are around 2. And that means it's double the force feedback. So you're doubling up the force feedback of what is sent to the wheel. Is that cheating? Or,
No.
All right, like, explain that. Like, tell me about it.
Well, it's just leveling your force off. So like, it's like running, I mean, this is a terrible comparison, but it's like running no power steering versus power steering, right? If you run no power steering, you're going to have a heavy wheel. If you run a low power steering, you're going to have a medium weight wheel. Or if you have like a high pressure, high volume pump type of thing that has a lot of force into it, or like an electric power steering pump that's cranked high up, it's going to have light wheel. So it's more of a adjustable, like just get it to where you want. Because again, too, with everybody having different wheels, like Logitech, like the G29 gear driven wheels, the Thrustmaster TXs, even direct drive wheels have variations in how much force they have. So one wheel is not going to feel the same as another wheel.
So how do you balance that when you're making a car pack?
You don't. You make it feel good on your hardware, and then have people adjust accordingly. So because everybody can adjust their force feedback in game for the car. If they think it's too heavy, they can bring it down. If they think it's too light, they can bring it up.
What's your hardware setup?
I got a Thrustmaster TX, basically a T300.
Okay. How about, let's say we didn't touch on trail. Like, I know there's dynamic trail and there's mechanical trail, but like in general, what, like for the audience, what is how does trail affect the self steer and the force feedback?
So I guess the trail will basically self steer the car with lower caster numbers. So if you have a high trail knuckle, you can run a lower caster and the car will still self-steer the same, but then you'll have a flatter contact patch at full lock. That's why like WiseFab Driftworks, Geomasters, stuff like that, has a really high trail, and they run a little bit less caster, or they have like a top plate that bolts on and moves actually the whole top of the strut outward and forward.
No.
You can see that the same way you see your scrub radius, but instead of
Yeah.
it from being from the back, going laterally from the kingpin inclination axis, you look at it from the side and you look at it basically longitudinally. So you got that same grid line and how that intersects with the ground compared to the center contact patch of the tire. That's your trail level.
Scrub radius will also affect your steering, like self-steering to a degree too, because you'll get more bump steer if you have more of a scrub radius.
You're touching on so many things. All right, let's explain bump steer.
So bump steer is like when you go over a bump in the road, or the car gets a steering force of some sort from like a difference in the road surface. It will pull on the tire a little bit, and you'll feel that in the steering. It can actually steer the car completely if your bump steer is really bad. It'll like jerk your steering wheel if you hit a bump.
Yeah, so like pull it out of your hands.
Yeah,
I got a on my screen here. I have a kinematic software up that I use when I develop suspensions for cars now. And I can show you exactly what he's talking about.
Yeah, I love this. This is awesome. I don't even know what this is. Blown my mind. It's only been like 5 minutes in.
So like, as you see here, you can see this toe gain right here, and that says basically for every inch of travel, it gains 0.01 inch of toe, which is negligible. But if we look at here at the degree in the toe, you can see that like, all right, so I set it up to do 3 inches of dive, and this is a really well done. I mean, I spent a lot of time making sure I minimized bump steer and stuff like that. So you can see like it has a half of a tenth of a degree of toe out at 3 inches of compression. But if we change the way this tie rod interacts, because it all depends on your tie rod geometry and a couple other things, and where are we going? I want this. I'm just going to throw this to something ridiculous just to demonstrate. So now you can see like that went up to 0.3 just by moving my tie rod out. 0.3 a degree, which is quite a bit. And then let me see if I can do here. Let me try to animate this real quick so you can kind of see it a little bit. It's kind of hard to see, but you can see the tire will toe in or toe out depending on the compression. You can also see it with camber gain too. If you watch this value down here for the toe gain, you can see that the toe is going up, and then that differential toe will. And so if you have like a lot of toe gain, and then as you like say you have single-sided suspension increase, so you're in roll when you're set in corner, and that roll tire has say 3 degrees of droop, or 2 inches of compression due to body roll and all that stuff, and it toes out a half inch just to be extreme, while your inside is up maybe 1.5 inches, and that actually has a little bit different of toe, and it actually maybe says it toes out. All of a sudden you have a lot more steering than you originally set up when you were static. So your car is steering more than it was before it went through bump or roll.
Yeah, just based on body roll alone.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Man. All right, whatever the software is, I need to get it.
It's expensive. It's
right.
a performance trend suspension analyzer.
All right, let's see. Moving on. Let's see. So I've been looking at a crap ton of other people's cars. It's pretty easy with Content Manager to just like unpack someone's ACD file or whatever the extension is, and look at the different physics and stuff. And I've noticed a lot of the tires seem to be kind of like a shot in the dark. What are the common things that you see? I mean, let's just go beyond tires, but like when someone else makes a car pack, what are the common pitfalls that you look at and you see people making over and over again?
they don't understand anything that they're adjusting.
Yeah, a lot of people just don't really understand what the numbers do, but they've adjusted things to figure out like, oh, it kind of does this when I adjust this number, which that's how I started doing stuff, so there's nothing wrong with that, but there's definitely a huge benefit when you know what things do when you're adjusting them, obviously. So,
Absolutely.
a lot of things that I see, it isn't necessarily one value that they adjust that makes it feel this way because everything in the tires works together.
Mm-hmm.
Mhm.
So when you adjust one thing, you also need to adjust a lot of other things. And people don't do that. They'll be like, oh, it feels good like this, but I just want a little bit more grip. So they'll just adjust their DX/DY reference and it'll get more grip. But then their relaxation length, their dampers, their or dampening the like wheel rate or the rate for like the tire rate. I
So
guess
the big
it's just
thing I see.
it's just rate. Yeah.
That rate is a very big indicator of somebody that does or does not know what they're doing, and 90% of the time it's wrong.
Well, like, where is that in file? Show me. Like, so we're looking at the the DX/DY values, obviously,
I have highlighted right there, tire
Yeah.
rate.
and that's regardless of the version of the tires. That rate is the same one, right?
Should be. I mean, honestly, if you're not using version 10, you're not doing it right.
Well,
You need to be using version 10.
we'll talk about that in a little bit, but so explain that rate, that Newton meter force that I can obviously read on screen. Like what is that? What is that number?
Tires inherently are a spring themselves due to air pressure and tire construction. Like, they're not just rigid pieces of rubber, so they have squish to them and all that. So your rate is how much of a spring that your tire is. Obviously, if you have a wider, short sidewall tire, it's going to be a lot stiffer of a tire. If you have a bias ply slick from the 70s that has like 8 inches of sidewall, obviously that's going to be a pretty soft tire, depending on what how much air pressure you have in it. So that's one key part of like getting your tire to act appropriately, is having it properly be sprung, proper amounts of squish.
Mm-hmm. Does Assetto actually take into account tire pressure and rate? Because obviously, if you put more pressure in it, the rate should go up.
Well, that's the thing that I see 90% of people do wrong. And so we got this pressure static here, and that's where this rate value starts.
Ooh.
So if you say, and which is like, you can see it quite commonly, I'll just use WDTS or like Gravy Garage. No, I'll just use WDTS for example. They have, if I remember correctly, it's like 30 or 28, 30, somewhere around 30 psi on the front tire, and then their static pressure on the rear tire is like 27. And it's, again, I don't know exactly what they're modeling at after, but if you just use context clues of the width being the same, I'm assuming it's going to be the same front and rear tire of like a 225. If it's the same tire diameter, the same, relatively supposed to be the same tire front and back, the fact that they didn't change the rate when it came to that prior tire pressure adjustment for the static, it's the same exact tire front and rear.
Let me
Regardless
see.
of it just says static 20 or static 25. If you don't change that rate, it's still that same tire pressure.
Well, I'm actually looking at it right now. So the front, the static pressure is 30, and the rate is 305,000, and on the rear, static is 27 and the same rate. So what you're saying is that the static pressure is 3 psi lower in the rear, but because they haven't messed with the rate, it's essentially like
Still
apples and
essentially the
oranges.
same.
Ah.
Yeah, it's
That's something a lot of people don't understand. I definitely didn't even understand that for a long time. And it makes a huge difference when you get that set right. And I guess the thing that I was going towards is mainly like a feel thing. Is a lot of cars have too numb of a feeling tire, and you can actually like see it when you're driving the car from outside of the car and you go around a corner. It almost just like floats the back end a few inches or mils side to side.
Mm. So like that's this rate versus pressure.
No, that's just like the overall numbness of the
encompassing.
tire from like people trying to make the cars handle a certain way but not wanting it to be just too snappy, but then just the overall data is not right. But as far as what he was getting at, the rate with the tire pressure is a big giveaway that someone doesn't know what they're doing in there.
All right, so yeah, I'm not gonna get demonetized, or well, no, I don't have any monetization, but I'm trying not to get yelled at for stuff. But so we're not going to disparage WDT particularly, but this is it.
Oh no!
Oh no, I'll trash on everybody. I don't care. But no, it's not about trashing on people. It's just calling out what's wrong.
Yeah, most drift car packs don't know what they're doing really, because a lot of people that are making drift car packs, I would say a handful of them are drifters in real life, and they're just trying to make a car that feels like real life in the game because most people don't. But they don't really know what they're doing, so they're just taking a shot in the dark, like you were saying, throwing numbers at things and making it feel a certain way instead of learning what everything does. Yeah.
Like I consider myself like I've done a lot of research. I've read a bunch of SAE papers, and I'm pretty familiar with the Pacejka formulas. And it seems like Assetto has like a quasi Pacejka. You know, that's the whole DXRef and the exponent.
That's part of it.
But for sure, you know, I really have not taken into account like the dampening and rate forces. Like inertia kind of makes sense, and yeah, I'm a real life drifter, and I have yet to see. And I mean, it could just be the difference between a game and real life. It could be that like Assetto is just got its hands tied, but I have yet to feel an in-game tire that feels similar to real life, and it really feels like you just kind of have to balance and get something that's good enough. Like, what do you think about that?
Yeah, I'll agree with that. You're never gonna get it perfect. Feel is always subjective to a degree. 100%. So I mean, what feels 100% real to one person isn't gonna feel 100% real to someone else.
And touching on a thing that we mentioned earlier too is everybody's on different hardware.
Yep, right. Exactly. So we got people on $3,000 direct drives, and then people on a hand-me-down G25 they got from their neighbor.
So yeah, you know, a lot of these wheels do not have the speed unless you're on like a direct drive, which tend to be a little bit better to actually keep up with the proper rotation of a real steering wheel.
Okay, but are we in the ballpark?
Well, there's a couple glaring issues with the side. Well, there's one major flaw with Assetto's tire model issue is that the tire pressure optimum here is the same for your longitudinal and your lateral. There is not a separate one where in like real life, as you drop tire pressure, you gain more lateral traction. You might lose a little bit of a little bit of longitudinal traction. Or I mixed that up. You gain longitudinal traction, but you lose a little bit of lateral. But you gain so much longitudinal that it kind of overwrites how much you lose laterally. So that's why you see like I was talking to Tom 2 nights ago or whatever. We were having a big discussion about this.
Yeah,
we were talking about how he will drop tire pressure to increase side bite and grip in his car. Where Assetto, you can't really do that. It is whatever your pressure ideal is where you're going to get your most grip. So if you drop the tire pressure to 15 psi when the pressure ideal is 34, until your tire gets hot enough, it won't have quote unquote the maximum grip until it gets the heat enough to gain that pressure. Yeah, at the same time, you're then fighting tire heat.
Right. So that's something I've always wondered because a lot of the real life drifters when they come to Assetto, they're like they want maximum grip, so they just kind of drop the PSI as low as possible. So. Again, I'm a noob at this. So what you're saying is if I drop below 34 on the tires you've got on screen, it's not ideal. Like, to use the term,
it won't be a perfect optimum grip. Yes, that's correct. You'll actually, the more you drop your tire pressure, the more likely you are to be losing grip overall than actually gaining grip in Assetto.
No, so
Now, there's
like,
other things that are in
Spongy.
combination with that, but yeah.
so like, let's say that the ideal is 34 on this picture. So what's the difference between 24 and 54 or 44?
In terms of pressure ideal,
Well, so like 10 above or 10 or below, what is the actual effect when I'm in game?
that all depends. A lot of that too is right here. There's a couple different ones. It's a formula type of thing, and it's hard to put into words currently for me. But basically, it's just the farther you get away from it, and it should be relatively even on both above and below. The farther you get away from it, the less, the more grip you lose. And I believe it's this right here, this pressure D gain. You can also set that too. So like this is, if I remember correctly from Arch's pipeline, is a 4% grip loss or 0.4% of a grip loss above anytime you are per PSI you are away from that pressure ideal. So in terms of like this, whatever, so 14 times 0.4%. I'm terrible at math, so I'm just gonna say that's 1.8% or so, 1 point something like that percent, is going to be the grip difference between where I'm at statically and where I'm at for my pressure ideal.
Okay. Man, blowing my mind. How about that XMU value? Because I have no clue what that's for.
This
Yeah.
unused in version 10. Don't worry
Really?
about it.
Seriously?
Yep, that's what these
Oh, no.
replaced.
But I thought XMU was replaced by the CX mult.
No, CXMult does a different thing.
What does that do?
That is, there's a Arch pipeline that he has it all in. I don't know off the top of my head, but it's basically the difference in lateral grip and longitudinal grip. I remember. I just pull it up so we can know for sure.
Appreciate it.
I will say overall, from like 5-6 years ago, how all of the drift cars in Assetto felt in the different car packs to how the newer physics on new car packs coming out feel, it's come a long ways in the right direction.
Now, I think I 100% agree with you. Are we coming to the limit of the Assetto Corsa engine, or so we're it's only going to get better from here?
It's people need to understand what they're actually doing. And there's, because I mean, there's been that discussion too of like the vast majority of stuff is all copy paste between other people. They see WDTS, they like it, they steal it, put it in their car pack. They might adjust two things that they think are going to increase their feel better. And maybe a bunch of people like that, so that's popular at that point. And then another person comes along, copies as their base, adjusts a few things that they think make it feel better, and then that takes off. So a lot of it is, it's just a combination of
Yeah, it's a community
the
effort.
base. Yeah, the base of what everybody is starting with now is closer to what everybody seems to like for feel.
So yeah, that's my next topic, like plagiarism. My last video that I posted was kind of panned, and the guy who, he literally copied and pasted the tire, changed the name, and gave credit in the description. But like, if you just downloaded the pack and didn't know any better and didn't look at the description, it doesn't say Gravy Garage on the tires. Like, how many car packs do you think are doing that? And like, what is the effect overall in the community? Because we're trying
90%.
Yeah, most of them are.
that
I would
much.
say. I would say a good handful of the car packs are doing that. I mean,
Well, like we just talked about for the last 5-10 minutes, it's tires are to the general public a black magic. Nobody really knows what these values do. There's a good resource on learning them from Arch's pipeline, but a lot of people don't tend to put the effort in to actually understand what's going on. And so why would they figure it out themselves when they can just take somebody else's that feels good. Because, there's only one or two things that they feel like needs to be adjusted. Again, if they know what they're adjusting.
Before, what I see and a lot of people do was they would take like I don't know if you guys remember like the Tovi tire packs.
Yep.
People would get like groups of tires like that, and they would just put them all into a car, and you had a ton of different tire options, and the car could feel totally different on different tires. People have basically just taken the ones of those that they've liked, and then they've changed the values in it, and since they feel that they've changed enough of the values, they can just call it something else. Which I don't know how I feel on it necessarily, because while you're taking somebody else's work and changing it, that person also doesn't necessarily want their name on something that they've done and someone else has altered. Because then it's not their work anymore. Like, it is, but it's not. So, like, if someone takes my tires and they change half the values, that tire is not going to feel the way I intended it to feel, so don't put my name on it. Like, if you want to, go for it, but I wouldn't say that they're mine. Say, like, references or something like that. That's how I feel on that topic, I guess. I don't care if people use my stuff personally, because I want to see the community grow. So if people take my physics and they put them on their cars, sweet. I know that that car is going to feel good when I drive it. It's another car for me to drive. Cool.
Do you think overall the community is headed in a positive direction, or is things like this rampant amount of plagiarism inherently damaging?
I personally think it's getting more negative now, personally, just because there's so many people. Modding at this point has become, and I will say I'm contributing to that with some of the tutorials I've made on adjusting certain things and stuff like that. I haven't gone into a bunch of the tutorials I wanted to make, but I've made tutorials previously, and obviously as it gets more and more accessible for people, the easier it is for, I'm going to say, low effort to propagate. Mm-hmm. Because if that barrier to entry of getting in and modding only takes, a skip versus, back when me and Tom started modding, we had to literally like start from ground zero, which obviously there was people before us, because I came in semi late in the game.
At least will help people do it the right way and know what they're doing right away versus us trying to just guess and figure it out. Like, there was the pipeline, but there was so much mixed information on Discords and forums and stuff. Like,
everybody has like, and the biggest proponent too that we see is just a bunch of people are talking about, well, Assetto can't do this, or Assetto can't do that, or this is wrong, or that's wrong, when it's just, oh, well, they heard so-and-so say that so-and-so said that so-and-so said X, Y, and Z. It's just a game of telephone at that point that gets repeated with all these mantras of like, well, Assetto's engine's outdated. Well, if you use C physics, the extended physics with custom shaders patch, there is a whole slew of doors open. Now, that comes with its own issues when in terms of like updates might change the way things feel depending on what they're developing at the moment. But in all, it's a lot more accurate. And then they have this other physics portion too called Cosmic, which is a whole new suspension design setup where like currently there's inherent issues with Assetto's. When you talk vanilla Assetto, there's inherent issues with some of the geometry and its forces and like anti-squat values and stuff like that, and double wishbone. Certain issues with strut suspensions and all that. Certain issues with solid axle suspensions. There's certain general inherent issues that when you start talking about some of these deeper, more mechanical versions, or the kinematics and stuff like that, Cosmic will fix a lot of that because it changes how you can design suspensions, but it's infinitely more complicated than it is in standard Assetto. So again, it takes just that much more knowledge to get it done correctly.
Now, how old is Assetto? I think it's like 10 years old at this point,
2014.
Right? Yeah, it came out in 2014, so...
So, like, at what point is Assetto just too old and we need to move on to something else?
Well, they are coming out with Assetto Corsa 2, so I'm pretty excited about that. I'm going to be trying to get into that right away.
That's a cool development too, and I'm excited about that. But overall, especially with custom shaders patch physics, it's not too old. In fact, it's probably the best sim on the market, hands
I would
down.
agree with that.
And it's like when you
100%
talk about like professional race teams, a vast majority of professional race teams, unless they're like OEM backed with like access to OEM sims, a lot of them are running modified or even vanilla versions of Assetto Corsa.
So I have read a bunch of stuff from Kunos, and quite frankly, especially with like ACC and stuff, they seem to be more interested in regular racing versus drifting. I'm a little bit like apprehensive that the new version of Assetto will cater to drifting as a whole. Like, what do you think of that?
I think that it doesn't matter. We'll figure out a way. We did with this one, we'll do it again.
I'll say it's...
And with drifting being as big of a motorsport as it is now, I feel like they have more of an appeal to... They see the audience is there.
For sure. And at the same time, too, it's... As long as the base physics engine is quote-unquote correct, as long as it resembles the current Assetto Corsa, but maybe refined in things improved, so that way, like, the anti-squat values aren't wrong inherently, it doesn't have an issue with that calculation type of thing, then it's just like Assetto currently. We can make our own suspensions for drifting. We can make, say, you don't like the tires or whatever, which is, again, a subjective thing, but we can make our own tires for drifting, like, assuming modding is open. So as long as it's the same based in reality physics engine, it's not like going to Forza or whatever, where you don't really know anything about what's going on behind the black screen. As long as it's based in reality, it doesn't matter if they inherently support drifting or not, because physics are physics.
Yeah, that a little bit of my concern is I talked to the maker of Shaders Patch, and I asked him, like, how are you able to enhance the engine so much? And it turns out, and I'm not sure if I should say it too publicly, but they left the PDB files in when they released it. And if you don't know about like PDB files, they're the actual like debugging information code-wise. And so he was able to reverse engineer the majority of the game and figure out how to hook into it simply because they omitted deleting the debug files from it. I'm going to assume that Kunos is not going to do that in the future, and I'm a bit concerned that our ability to get something on the level of CSP in the future is going to be limited.
I don't remember where I read it.
Supreme.
Yeah, I agree with that. We'll just continue editing this. But as far as like the game goes, if the game comes out and the game is better than it is currently, then that's already a better base. And then from what I've read, they're going to still allow modding. If not, I mean, people always figure out a way.
Right.
Yeah. I mean,
People
there's only
mod Call of Duty and stuff.
There's only so much you can mod an existing game. Like, again, I'm from a software background, and Assetto Corsa is extremely wasteful when it comes to system resources. I've got a RTX 3090, and I run VR, and I have to turn settings down to be able to get a stable 90 frames per second. I think with a more modern engine, that shouldn't be an issue. Like, I think a 3090 should be more than enough to hit 90 frames.
Yeah, I agree with that.
I mean, that also comes down to I'm avoiding the vanilla Kunos aspect of it, the vanilla Assetto.
Right.
99% of mod creators do not optimize their cars worth a shit.
That is a big thing.
Very terrible when it comes to mod optimization.
Yeah.
Which is a
4K
whole other
textures on everything, bunch of just random textures that are just like
objects.
for one tiny little part of the car that's not even seen.
Yeah,
and you'll see a big difference between a car that's well optimized, especially if it has LODs and stuff like that, versus a car that's 90% of what average mods are out there right now.
Yeah, I might get hate for it, but I get really annoyed when someone puts out a car pack and the biggest thing that they're touting is the fact that the engine is properly modeled.
Yeah,
that's literally nothing. Personally, I think a lot of that stuff's just junk, because when it comes to actually driving the car, you don't drive with. I mean, unless you have a hood off, but sure. But like 90% of the time, a lot of the stuff that a lot of people are focusing on currently are stuff that you do not use or see when you are driving the car.
Right.
Yep.
But it does, like, I feel like some car packs are popular because of, like, those extras that they have.
Sure, absolutely. I mean,
Oh
it comes
yeah,
to the point where it's like
definitely.
the public's
But
view, the general view versus more of I guess I'd consider us hardcore users' view, where we're like, this doesn't matter. But
yep.
at the same time, it matters to the general public because they might want to open the bonnet when they're taking, screenshots or whatever. When
Right. So, I
If
mean,
all you do is play Assetto to take pictures of cars in Assetto, that's great. But if you play Assetto to drive, that's just going to be one of the cars that sits and you never drive it because it handles
Mhm.
like shit, probably.
well, okay, so what makes a popular car pack? What are the ingredients, the secret mixture that makes a car pack so that people want to download it and you can find it on random public servers?
Hype,
I was about to say hype. Does it
hype, and
have
downloads. If you
the
get a lot of
general
people
features?
driving it, people for some reason think it feels good, other people will follow.
I would say it takes like 3 or 4 quote unquote respected viewpoints. Now, I'd say that with quotes, with air quotes around respected. Um, it takes 3 or 4 people saying, okay, well, this car pack's legit. It feels just like my XYZ IRL car, even though it's a completely different chassis, but whatever. Um, and then and all of a sudden, people take it, run with it, and if it has quote unquote visuals up to standard and has all the bells and whistles that people are looking for, you'll have a hype pack.
So you got to make it so that someone who's got clout runs with it.
It definitely helps.
Yeah. And then until you make something like DWG where inherently it's a good base, so as people stumble across it, they'll go, oh, well, this is how it should feel, assuming they have an idea of what things should feel like.
Right. So
And then it will self build just because it's good inherently.
like harkening back to the Tando Buddies days, when I first started, Tando Buddies was like the industry standard.
Hmm.
And
I think that's because a lot of people at that time were coming from real life to Sims, and they didn't want to put a lot of money into it, so they were buying cheaper wheelbases. And because there was a large influx of real life drifters coming into Assetto with cheap wheelbases, they, one, didn't know how a sim drives. They weren't used to not having a real good sense of speed and knowing when to brake, or like uh, having know what the inertia is supposed to feel like of the car. So they would just drive this car and be like, this car is easy to drive. I can drive this one. It
That's
must be
it.
good because I can drive a real life car. I don't know why I wouldn't be able to drive a car in a video game. So those
That's
cars
a
blew up because they were easy to drive.
that's a big thing I see and agree with wholeheartedly, that there's a lot of this IRL to sim transition, which if that's what you want to do, hell yeah, we'll welcome you with open arms. But the biggest issue I've seen is that people they want to drive at the level that they drive in real life. So they find the quickest thing that will get them there.
Yeah.
And whether that's because they have poor hardware or even the fact that like it took me a few months of driving quote unquote more realistic cars. Again, at the time was very limited options and they weren't that great. But it took me a few months to actually get a hold of what was going on in the sim. And as
Yep.
I've continued to drive and develop my skill in sim, you start comparing 1 to 1 with real life. At that point, once you really have a good understanding of how a car drives, then you can start noticing all the other issues. But a lot of people don't want to put that legwork into throwing all their driving experience out the window and focusing on learning what the sim is showing them.
right. So back when we started out, was Tando Buddies was the industry standard. So if someone is trying to get in now, I mean, let's say someone's on a budget and if they're going to get a Logitech unit, which obviously isn't the best, doesn't respond quickly enough. But if someone was to get a Logitech from real life and try to transition to sim, what setup, what car pack, what tracks would you recommend for them?
I'm biased. DWG.
I will say.
But I've been making this car pack on a T300 and not upgrading specifically because I want the cars to be able to be driven on all wheelbases. So I've got people that test the cars on everything from G25s to like fancy track drives. So I want the cars to be drivable all across the board. They might be hard to get into, but at least you're gonna have an understanding of how the cars are supposed to drive.
Mm.
I will say my previous physics are not that good, and I have an update coming soon for them. I've been trying to get out for a long time, but it's been taking a long time because
And
constantly learning new stuff.
I would say
But
the longer it takes, the more we figure out, the more it makes it better. Which means the
yeah,
more you have to redo, which means the
but
longer
I
it
guess
takes.
if I had to say car packs to get when you're first getting into it, WDTS is not a bad one to get into because it's still somewhat correct, but they are easier to drive. You're just going to have to kind of learn that every car pack you get into is going to have a different feel. I don't think it's as bad these days as it used to be. There are still some car packs that have 5.920 inertia, like DTP, Tando Buddies.
Mm.
I don't know what exactly new car packs have come out with that, but usually when I download them, I just delete them right away when I see that. Most people don't do that. I don't know. There's so many cars out there. Just if it feels super floaty,
Right.
know that it's not real.
Well, okay, so
You have
like
a beat on what's floaty, actually.
Yeah.
so you know to go with like realism and whatnot. Like personally, I've tried to drive and enjoy the VDC cars, and you know I've looked at their tire physics specifically, and they're extremely high grip values, extremely high horsepower values, and you know I personally in real life I think like the maximum speed I've ever hit is around 90 miles an hour when entering a drift, and they don't feel like the VDC cars. Like there's a whole series based around them. People you know will only do VDC and absolutely nothing else. Like, what's your opinion on how realistic they are and the validity of that series?
I mean, series, give or
Uh,
take, it is what it is. But I think
which
personally,
ones are you talking about though?
I'm
I
assuming
mean, the public pack, you
The
know.
3.0?
yeah, let's just go with the
Yeah,
latest pack that
yeah,
everybody's going to be using at this point. Then
right.
I don't think it's that great when it comes to looking at a lot of the values. As you know, as you learn stuff, you see what's going on behind the curtain. I think there are some inherent issues with it personally, but at the same time, I've never driven a Pro 1 car at the limit. So what do I know? But just based off what we understand from other physics, I don't think they are the greatest. But if it's what people like and what they enjoy, have fun.
Well, and
I
anything
like
specifically?
them.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So I I agree with what he's saying. As far as the data goes, um, they're not. They're kind of doing the same thing as everyone else. It seems kind of just taking a shot in the dark at stuff. But the outcome, the feel of the cars, I think is pretty accurate for an actual pro level drift car. The amount of people that actually get to drive a pro level drift car though is not that big in real life. Like you can, but an actual pro level drift car has a enormous amount of grip and an enormous amount of power to the point where it's literally braking itself and like it feels like it's trying to kill you when you're driving it.
Right.
Like
Well, okay, so
they
like on screen right now, I've got VDC tires up, and juxtaposed to what Cam has, like, so the DX ref for the VDC cars, the DX ref is 1.476, the DY ref is 1.576, and the exponent is in the point 0.8 to 0.9 range.
Mhm.
And then the rate itself is a little bit lower, at what's that, 271,000, The dampening is kind of low too, which kind of makes sense. You're trying to get it to hook, so that dampening should be lower. Compared to most of the other packs that I've seen, like I usually don't see the reference values above like 1.2-ish range, or actually, let me,
For a reference point, Kunos has their semi-slicks around, like, not semi-slicks, they're actual slick tires around 1.5.
interesting.
So that's just a reference point of kind of gauging roughly. Now you have, people say what they want to say about Kunos tires, but as like a base reference point, that is like slick levels of grip.
So, like, what's the relationship between the DX Ref and the LS, Exponent X?
It's a load value.
Well, like for the people who's watching, like an exponent for someone who's not mathy, because my understanding is the DX Ref is more the constant value than the exponent is, the exponential.
Dynamically changes with road.
Right.
Yeah.
So to me, the DX Ref itself is kind of like more a starting point, and the exponent is really more like I shouldn't use the same term, but like it's exponentially,
The DX-DY ref is the standard of what you should be looking at for grip. That is how you set your grip. All the exponent will do is just change how it changes with load. The smaller that number, the more drop off or gain you'll have with light, or you'll get more quote unquote gain above your or below your FZ0, and the more you'll have a higher drop off above your FZ0.
So like right now I'm looking at both WDT and VDC, and the WDT for the DX Ref is like 0.2 beneath the VDC, but the exponent is 0.6, 0.7, while the VDC is straight up 0.8 to 0.9.
So WDT has significantly more drop off with load.
Now, how does that affect feel in the car?
Well, as you put more load on the tire, it will have less grip.
Isn't that like the opposite of what you want?
No, that's how it works in real life.
Huh?
Yeah, I think that I wouldn't put too much. Man, how do I say this? For the VDC cars, having them have more grip, I guess, with more load, is not really that out of range, in my opinion, because in later years, or in recent years, the tires that have come out from manufacturers have been more engineered for drifting, for taking these extreme loads. So the tires that a lot of people, even down to grassroots levels, are running on their cars have been more engineered for drifting than they ever have been before. Even like your average consumer tire now will have more load put into account building the tires than they ever did before, because the cars are heavier. So a tire model that was made for the cars in like 2014, 2016, whenever they put in the V10 tires in previous years, I don't want to look at the Kunos values too much on that, because they have, in general, in real life, tires have gotten better from that time until now tremendously.
Which is a solid point. Yeah.
Huh, I didn't even
And then-
think about that.
Like, if you get a Kenda KR20A, if you get a Volino, if you get whatever tire you pick, they're going to be tremendously engineered specifically for drifting. Like, those tires last so long, they have so much grip, lateral, forward, like everything, like, compared to tires before. So that's something a lot of people tend to forget, especially with like putting so much into extremely realistic physics. A lot of those guys, like Arch specifically, I'm gonna point a finger there, his tires are modeled after an older tire. So their overall grip and loss of grip is going to be not realistic to a modern tire.
So yeah, data on new stuff just does not exist really. So
Yeah.
you can only
So
build
people,
database tires because if you have the data available for them, assuming it's in the correct ranges that
exactly.
you'd see.
So it's like super realistic physics can be good and not good at the same time. There's a point when you kind of have to just put a little bit of stretch value into things, considering
Right.
real life stuff has come a long ways since when this game came out.
Right. Oh man.
So like a Kunos street tire and like a modern street tire replicated after a modern real life tire is going to have more grip, and it's going to take more stress.
I say it too, and that also, again, super nuanced, which is why I always say that is that uh, uh, an economy street tire versus a high performance summer tire versus a semi slick tire, and even within the own different size ranges of that same tire, are all going to act drastically different. The compound will change between a narrow version and a wider version, so the wider version might have not only more grip just from being a wider tire, but it might have more inherent grip just because there's a different compound in it.
Yep.
So the tires are extremely nuanced.
So I mean, thinking about compounds and whatnot, the VDC tires have a larger value by a tenth of the DX or DY ref. The DY ref it's got more lateral grip than it has forward grip. But when I'm looking at the WDT tires, it actually has more forward grip than it does side grip. Like what goes into the factors on that? Like, is it just purely because the VDC cars tend to have more horsepower that you kind of need that side grip?
I think it's
Well,
more of people are searching for a grip feel answer, and they just add more side grip to get the feel answer that they want.
yeah, and other values also play into the lateral and longitudinal grip levels. Like, if the tire has more flex, you're going to get more lateral grip, with the DXDYs being more of like a longitudinal grip tire to a degree. Like, they're like rolling resistance plays into that too. Like, if you'll be
That's
able to
another thing that's
spin the
very
tire
wrong.
or more or less.
Okay, let me go a little bit more into that rolling resistance then.
And then, are you looking at WDT or WDTS tires?
WDTS. Yeah.
Okay.
There should be 1.21 or 1.23 for grip levels on the street cars.
Really good memory. It's spot on.
I've spent a lot of time looking at tire I9s.
Yeah.
Like, for a common thing too, I see that's very wrong in a lot of senses is that rolling resistance slip.
Yep. Being way too high because people think that adds side bite.
Well, because in a sense it does. The way Kunos has that
Yeah.
calculation done, that value being in the 3 to 5 thousands, significantly increases rolling resistance. Let's just call it tire drag, as you have slip angle, and it's almost exponentially like extremely too high. And you'll notice a difference. Like there'll be a lot of cars that you'll have that might have that higher rolling resistance slip, and you'll chuck it in, and it just feels like the car's dying out. Which, in a sense, that might be a way to add side grip when you're looking for certain stuff. At the same time, you lose a lot of that dynamic feel when it's so high because the tire doesn't do quote unquote what it's supposed to do.
Yep.
So with all of these like insane variables, how do you? I mean, it just seems like too many variables to balance, and like how do you design something realistically?
It takes a long time.
Data.
I
What you
have been
mean?
working on tires specifically for years. I did C physics stuff for a long time, and then I got sick of them coming out with because I'm trying to do public stuff. I don't want to put it out there and then an update comes out and my cars handle like crap, and then I have to update all of them because I have a lot of cars I would like to put out. So I went back to doing vanilla stuff again, and it was basically like restarting again, but with more knowledge. And it takes a long, long time to get the tires feeling how I want them to feel.
Also, another point too is just understanding what the values do will inherently clear up a lot of what you're searching
Yeah,
for.
definitely, definitely.
It's like if there's certain given ranges that so like the guy that codes the extended physics is like if I remember, I might be mislabeling it, but I'm like 90% sure he's a race engineer. He works on a ton of actual sim development for legitimate real life like Le Mans level race teams.
Mm.
So he's an engineer at a certain level. He knows exactly what he's talking about. He sees the data, and he's the one that's literally writing the code for extended physics. So he has certain ranges that he recommends for vanilla stuff. And so if you take what he says, combine it with a general, preferably a solid understanding of how tires react and some of these tire values in the INI, you use his baseline values for some things and you kind of can just adjust from there. And like I said, as you know what these tire values do, you kind of intrinsically, inherently know a good starting point for what you're trying to replicate.
Yeah. I've also gone back and looked at Kunos stuffs a lot.
Yep.
Because, like, I'll get so far away from the way the Kunos cars feel sometimes. Like, I'll be editing tire data, and then I'll be like, man, is this realistic, or is it just been, like, I keep tweaking
Do I
it
just know how to
over?
drive it well enough now? I can't
Yeah,
remember.
so then
Yeah.
I'll, like, go back and reference like the Kunos stuff because it is a good reference point. They knew what they were doing when they put it together. So I'll go back to that and be like, oh, okay, well this looks like it's a little off, and then I'll play with things, and then
So if you know
it'll
where
get
Kunos
feeling
went
more
wrong,
dynamic again. Yeah, exactly. Like, I don't know, I guess tire stuff, it takes a long time to get it to feel the way people want them to feel, and I feel like that's why all car packs and stuff that come out don't feel finished, is because there's just so much that goes into making a car
so yeah,
that,
he's talking about suspension stuff like that. Like even
yeah,
if you have a
so
good 90% of the geometries are piss poor and
Mm.
setup values. Like if you have wrong setup window ranges, you won't even be able to get to the levels that you have defined as the baseline in your suspensions INI type of thing. Just comment on say like the Gravy Garage cars. They have certain values in their suspension and in their tire INI that gets completely overwritten by their setup INI because their setup adjustment windows aren't big enough.
yeah, that too.
Well, like to think about the Kunos stuff, like personally, the Kunos drift cars just feel like absolute crap to me, and that's
Agreed.
because certain things are inherently wrong. How do you decide what Kunos did was wrong for drifting, and what is the Bible of you shouldn't stray too far away from?
Understanding where their calculations went wrong for tire stuff. I mean,
Yeah,
it's one of those things too. It's like it's data. So is their geometries inherently correct for the car? Maybe, maybe
usually
not.
no.
Yeah, usually
A
no.
lot of the cars in Kunos have inaccurate geometries. Some of their arrows are a little weird. There's things about the Kunos cars that are inaccurate, but I think that their tire model is a good basis to go back to, because the V10 Kunos tires, they do feel pretty good. Like if you go out and you drive like go do some laps around Nürburgring in like a GT3 car or something, like it feels good. The thing is they weren't designing this car or this game for drifting, so their drift cars were just probably thrown
Got
together
together.
rather
Yeah.
quickly.
Right. So
So
keep going.
I just think that when making a drift car or really any car that you're trying to make for Assetto, you should be just replicating that as realistically as you can, down to everything, and then the tires, I guess I don't have a great answer for that one because I don't think there's any tires out there right now that are perfect.
As long as
I
you get
think
like the bones correct of the correct suspension geometry, the correct spring rates, the correct dampening values, the correct everything that is outside of tires, if that is done correct, then you can use tires to fudge grip correctly.
Yeah, like when I'm making suspension geometry for cars, like for instance, the S13s that I make, I measured my real life S13 suspension to make that. So it has a relocated rack into account. It has a shortened knuckle with roll center adjustment in the geometry. Like, as long as you do the geometry correct, you have the arrow at least somewhat simple enough, but shaping the car somewhat with the little wings, you'll be good there. And then starting with like the Kunos tires at least as a base is a great place to start from. If you want more grip, start with like the semi-slicks or something.
Which is
And
what like 90% of the grip cars are actually based around too. Or not grip cars, but drift cars nowadays, I think, got their start off semi-slicks.
yep,
Yeah,
I agree with that.
Yep. So like there seems to be three major versions of tires for Assetto: version 1, version 5, and version 10. And like the gravy cars are purely on version 1, and I'm not really sure why they're on version 1, but they seem to be pretty popular and I guess reasonably simplistic of a tire. What are the major differences between the versions as to why someone, like let's say someone's listening to this, should they go with version 10 over version 1 or 5?
Because it's more correct.
Yeah, version 10 is more correct, but I do kind of have an answer for why some car packs would use older versions.
Okay.
I had nothing to do with the Gravy Garage cars. I'm not affiliated with them in any way, but I can make a pretty good guess of what they were doing when they did that. A lot of tires that they used in the original Gravy Garage release were like those tire packs that I was talking about.
Oh, it's
And
like
those were
version
made
3.
on version 5, version 7, whatever. So that's the version that they need to use because if they put that data into a version 10 tire, it's not going to react right. It's not going to handle right. It doesn't have the right values. So they are
You
probably
literally can't take
using
a version 7 to a version 10. You will literally just sit there spinning in the pits if you don't put the correct version 10 values in there.
exactly. So they probably are just using those older versions because the tires that they wanted to put on their cars that they thought felt real or that they liked were a tire pack made on the older version.
I will also say a lot of people seem to not realize that version on the headers is not for the version that you are working on, the iterative version. It is for calling out specific parameters per the INI.
Mhm.
Yep.
Yeah, I mean, I guess the Gravy Garage cars seem to be. I mean, I think it's from, if I just take a smattering online, you load up Content Manager and you go online, you do a filter for drift servers. I would say it's probably still maybe a little bit more WGT, but still almost 50% like Gravy Garage. Like, what do you think of that? Like, why, and like how do you think that we can change it in the future?
I don't know. I don't put too much into what I see in public servers because I know there's a ton of people that just play in private servers with their friends. That changes a lot too because there was a time when the DWG cars were like up there with the WDTS cars, and then it was
501.
yeah, the 501 was up there back in the day, and before that it was like the DW and the DWY's fabs. Like it's always changing. People are gonna drive whatever they're gonna drive, and the popular car pack is gonna be whatever it's gonna be at whatever time, and it doesn't really matter.
I
Like
just
I'll
think
just
they're
make
the
what I want to make.
easiest. Yeah, I think they're just the easiest entry point. They are very easy to drive. I mean,
Yeah,
not to be like super negative, but they're essentially like they're the modern day Tando buddies in my opinion. They
I agree
with
are
that.
exaggerated in a lot of ways in terms of like grip and certain things. Some things just are inherently incorrect, which again, I'm not going to get into that, but like they are super easy to drive. They have a bunch of popular cars. While I personally don't think they visually look the best, they do have a lot of the visual cues that people look for that they like, different liveries, a variety of cars, type of thing. So it's like they have the recipe of being
Yeah.
a top pack because they are easily approachable and have a large selection of popular car chassis.
It
So
also
then-
helps that there's Gravy Garage in real life.
Mm-hmm.
So like,
So
what-
like when
Yeah.
people see like if someone was like animal style car pack, there would probably be a lot, and it was like all the animal style cars. I'm sure there'd be a ton of hype behind it. Like it's just always gonna be that way. I can't say what the next car pack that's gonna come out is gonna be or how realistic it's gonna be. It's just always gonna be changing, and whatever the community does. I mean, I feel like the overall view of what cars are supposed to feel like now versus before is getting to a much better point.
Mm-hmm.
So I feel like it's only going to get better. Granted, there's always going to be like your low style gang car pack or LSG or whatever it's supposed to be car pack that comes out with your big rubber ducky fucking blow off valve and big shiny wheels and flashy lights and stuff and weird crazy animations. Stuff like that's always going to be around. It's modding. People are going to do what they want.
so
That's
like,
my opinion on that.
what's the balance between easy to drive and realistic? Like, how do you find that middle ground where someone's going to pick up your pack and enjoy it, and it's going to translate better to real life, but not too realistic that someone's going to hop in and get frustrated and just delete it?
I mean, that's just a personal issue at that point.
Yeah. That's I guess that comes back to just feels so subjective. I mean, when it comes to drifting in real life, any sim driving is going to help because at any point you're still growing somewhat of a muscle memory for things and you're still going to have an idea of what to do. Even with a Tando Buddy's car for your car being practicing, you're still going to get used to committing into a corner. You're still going to get used to steering in, steering out when the car feels like it needs it. So whether the car is realistic or not, you're still going to gain some sort of real life benefit from it.
So as long as it's not like extremely bad.
Yeah, I feel like people should go into content manager's showroom when they get a car. Even if it's an encrypted car, you can still see this. Just click the suspension thing and make sure it looks like the suspension on the real car is supposed to look.
There is a nuance to that too, though. As
I agree, but
showroom does not count for loaded weights. It's just simply as it was designed. So you
But
might
if
like
you
if you look at the
13 and you see double wishbone front suspension, that's
exactly,
not
yeah.
right.
But
And if
don't
you
like
actually drift, you're gonna know that that car doesn't have double wishbone front suspension. So if
Mhm.
you're trying to get something that transfers over to real life, just pick a car that at least has correctish suspension geometry, and you should be somewhat okay from there. If you want to look in the data, check in the car INI and just look at the inertias. If the inertias are greater than 5, it's not a realistic car. If it's under 5, it's probably realistic. Granted, if you have like a big sedan or something, it might be creeping up on 5,
I mean, I think the truck I did's at like 5.9 or something like that. But most of my
Yeah.
cars tend to be around like 4.5.
That's also a huge truck, and that,
Oh no, it's a massive truck. I was just using that as reference.
yeah.
Like most of my cars tend to be around 4.5. If you're talking like 90% of the standard cars out there, as long as it's relatively close to 4.5, you'll probably be all right.
Yeah, and the length inertia.
So
yeah,
from like the DWG perspective, what is the goal of the car pack?
I just want to make the cars that I want to make. My
Yep.
the goal, I guess, of my car pack is to just make cars that look good and look realistic and drive good and drive realistic.
Well, I mean, no offense, but sometimes driving good and driving realistic is like antagonistic points. Sometimes, there's bounds of the game where it's not going to drive as well because, it's a sim versus real life.
That's a poor take.
All right. Good. I mean, go on with that. Explain it to me.
No, it's literally that. Is like if the physics are correct, like I said earlier too, 90% of the physics engine in Assetto is not this antiquated can't do, which a lot of people seem to be reiterating, which is why they fudge stuff.
Mhm.
It's very good in a lot of senses, and it's only even better when you use the extension physics and stuff like that, which they have their own issues, but Assetto's engine is not one of these like can't do. It's going to feel bad in these situations. Overall, Assetto's is probably the best sim physics out there, and don't think of it as.
I do kind of get where you were going with that, though.
I'm sure there's 3 points, but
Yeah, so that comes back to feel is subjective, but I'm not making my cars to be the next greatest car pack. I'm literally just making the cars that I want to make, and I just share them so that I can drive with people, and I don't have to have people asking me, "Oh, where's the link for this? Where's the link?" So I just do it publicly.
Okay.
That's my opinion on that. I'm not trying to make the next greatest car pack by any means. I just want to make the cars that I want to drive. So like for me, it's like being handed a credit card with no limit, and it's
Right.
just like, hey, build whatever you want, do whatever you want. So it's just like whatever 3D models I can get is what I can make. So like a lot of the time we've been sitting here, I've been in this Cressida. That's a car I really like in real life and really want to build, but I can't do it right now. So I built one in the game.
Right.
My
That's my view on it. So eventually, when I feel the cars are like complete, then I just throw up a link for them and people can download them, and that's my take on that.
Well, do you have a timeline for your next pack?
I'm not good with timelines. I have a handful of cars that I would like to get out in the next month.
Okay.
I'm not gonna say which ones they are and which ones they aren't because it may change. I may decide to just drop something else, but I would like to get something out in the next month. I have the physics at a point where I'm very, very happy with them now. So at this point, it's just finishing up the models, and I have a lot of models that are done. They just need like a couple things, like I want to animate the wipers, stuff like that.
Yeah, like
So,
the little icing on the cake.
yep, fill in any holes where you can see through stuff. Just make sure the mapping's good.
Yeah. I mean, that in and of itself is a lot of work.
Yeah, exactly. Takes a lot of time.
That last 10% is literally 90% of the work.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Yep.
Hmm. It's a nice looking car.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. It's 12:45 in the morning for me.
Yeah, it's pretty late.
Gentlemen, this has been an amazing talk. Perhaps we'll do a little bit more in the future, but you've expanded my mind like an insane amount. I have an appreciation for what you do, and damn, the amount of knowledge you guys have gained over the years. I was originally one of the mindsets that maybe Assetto's physics wasn't really that good and it's antiquated, but I mean, I think you've done a pretty good job of changing my mind on that. I just wish, I hope Kunos for the next version, keeps that up and moves it forward, because there's so much more I think we can do with it.
Yeah, I agree. I'm curious to see what happens with the Assetto 2. They say that it's going to be moddable. I don't know what degree that is to. Obviously, we've taken this game to basically being an entirely different game at this point.
Totally.
But if it's supposedly better, I'm curious to see what happens with that and move on to that. If not, I'm just gonna stay here and keep going with this game, and it's pretty fun. I think it's the best game of any game I've ever played, and I've played a lot of games for drifting.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, it takes a lot for me to play the same game for what, I'm on 4 years at this point.
Yeah, exactly. Same here.
It helps that we can kind of create whatever the fuck we want, though.
Yeah, it keeps it fresh.
No other game has allowed me to literally take audio recordings from real life cars and make like that car in game 100%. Like, sounds like it, looks like it, drives like it.
Or just take the frickin' body kits that I designed for when I did renderings to now literally bringing them and driving them in a game.
Yep.
Yep.
Holy crap. All right, I'll let you guys go. Yeah, you guys have a good, I don't know, morning, afternoon. And
We'll go eat some breakfast.
yeah, sounds good. We will be in touch. Thank y'all. I'll talk to you later.
Yeah. Have a good day.